Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Kyle. I'm a first year studying government and neuroscience at the college, and I'm a member of the JFK Jr. Forum Committee. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located at both the Park Stride and the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Harvard College undergraduate Noah Plattner.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Noah Plattner. I'm a sophomore here at the college from Austria studying history and economics. Today we'll have the distinct honor of welcoming some very special guests on stage. We have Sara Nelson, International President of the Association of Flight Attendants-CWA, and we have Shawn Fain, President of United Automobile Workers. Sara Nelson is the International President of the Association of Flight Attendants-CWA, representing nearly 50,000 flight attendants across 20 airlines. Since taking office in 2014, she has become a leading advocate, leading voice in the labor movement, known for her bold leadership and advocacy for workers' rights. Nelson played a pivotal role in helping end the 2019 government shutdown and securing stronger COVID-19 protections and financial relief for aviation workers. Additionally, she was instrumental in lobbying for the FAA's ban for knives aboard airplanes. And she has also championed legislation to combat sexual harassment in the airline industry and was named one of Time's 100 most influential people in 2019. Shawn Fain is the president of United Automobile Workers, UAW, representing hundreds of thousands of active and retired automobile workers across the United States. Elected in 2023 as the first directly chosen president of UAW, he has been instrumental in revitalizing the union with a bold reform-driven agenda. He led a historic strike against the big three automakers, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, winning record contracts that included significant wage increases, cost of living adjustments, and the restoration of key benefits. Under his leadership, the UAW has expanded its push to organize non-union auto plants and reassert worker power in the evolving auto industry. We also have some great moderators for today's talk. Julie Su is a nationally recognized workers' rights and civil rights expert who served in President Biden's cabinet as the acting Secretary of Labor, where she successfully led efforts to build worker power and union strength, negotiating historic contracts and expanding good jobs for all. Prior to her nomination as U.S. Secretary of Labor, she served as Deputy Secretary and before that as the California Labor Secretary appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom. And our second co-moderator for the night will be Marshall Ganz. He is the Rita E. Hauser Senior Lecturer in Leadership, Organizing, and Civil Society at the Harvard Kennedy School. A renowned organizer and scholar, he brings decades of experience in grassroots movement and leadership to leadership development. Please join me in welcoming our honored guests to the stage.
Good afternoon. Anybody out there? All right, let's try it again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, good. Just making sure everybody's alive and present here. Thank you for joining us for this discussion. I think we may all have an opportunity to learn through this conversation. It is a little weird because we're missing one of our party who has been, I don't know, Sarah, do you have any particular insight on airplanes and why they come late? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, airplanes get delayed, but also people who travel all the time normally don't check their bags.
Oh, now this is a gem of wisdom. That's really valued. Yes, of course, it's good. So I think we have, Shawn, of course, is president of UAW, and Sara of the Association of Flight Attendants, and Julie, former acting Secretary of Labor and current IOP fellow, I believe. Is that true? Anybody in Julie's group from the IOP? Where are you? Oh, okay, all right, that's good, okay. I had framed this beginning to be about the breakthrough by the UAW, so I'm going to go ahead and say that, and maybe Shawn can hear it as a recording. It was on September 15th, 2023, that one of the most hopeful movements in modern American labor history occurred, which was the United Auto Workers won their tactically creative and well-organized stand-up strike that dramatically improved the economic lot of auto workers, and that has been experienced as one of the most hopeful moments in American labor history. The UAW, well, let's see. Yes, the UAW withstood plant closures beginning in the 1980s that were accelerated by NAFTA, resulting in over 90,000 factory closings. That's not just the UAW, that's not auto plants, but that's the whole deal. Since 1997, renewed attacks on labor, like the busting of the PATCO union by Ronald Reagan when he first came into office in 1981, and the subsequent decimation of what had been thriving industrial cities undergirded by union jobs. The stand-up strike that was won, they won what would amount to a 25% wage increase. I mean, this after years of just the opposite, elimination of the hated two-tier wage system where new people start at lower wages than senior people, just a way to divide workers. Reinstatement of cost of living adjustments, improved retirement benefits, and job security, and even a commitment to reopen an idled auto plant in Belvedere, Illinois. This win was particularly significant because since the 1930s, the UAW had been in the vanguard of American unionism. Sit-down strikes in 1937 that heralded an era of industrial unionism. 1950 Treaty of Detroit that established organized labor's critical role in health, welfare, and retirement of working people. And with the leadership of UAW President Walter Reuther began playing a major role in new organizing, embracing the civil rights movement and progressive politics in America. I was privileged to experience this personally when I began working with Cesar Chavez in 1965 with the United Farm Workers. It was the UAW, more than any other union, that came to our aid, not only with recognition and desperately needed strike funds, but real mentorship, political collaboration, and organized active local support for our 5-year-long boycott of California grapes throughout the US and Canada. And my assignment in the grape boycott was to get California grapes out of Canada. So I really studied under Dennis McDermott, who was then the UAW director in Canada, and learned a whole lot about how unions could work.
It's never about the grapes, Marshall.
Huh?
It's never about the grapes.
Yes. After decades of hard times for the UAW, corruption charges on previous leadership, a core team of union members led a referendum campaign taking advantage of an agreement between the UAW and Department of Justice and won the direct election of national leadership. In other words, one member, one vote. Nearly 2/3 of union member votes cast supporting the reform in one of the nation's most important unions. That rank and file movement led to the election of a reformer who vowed to bring the UAW back to its roots as a fighting union. With deep membership support, sacrifice, and solidarity, they won their strike, a victory so substantial that it was heralded as a source of new hope for American labor. And then I was going to say, join me in welcoming Shawn Fain. So then I will go on. But fights like that are never won alone, and solidarity really matters, not only in word, but more importantly in deed. A key leader in building that solidarity is Sara Nelson, president of the Association of Flight Attendants, an equally dynamic, forward-looking, and effective union, putting the movement back into the labor movement. Sara was born and raised in Corvallis, Oregon. Her mother, a music teacher, her father working in the lumber industry. She graduated from Principia College and soon after began a career as a flight attendant with United Airlines. She served in a variety of elected roles, and in 2002 was chosen to serve as communications chair. And in 2011, after playing major leadership roles dealing with the 9/11 impact on the industry and United's effort to crush the union, was elected international vice president, followed in 2014 when she was elected to serve as international AFA president, as well as a major force in the formation of national economic policy. I'll say in 2019, Sara and the AFA played a crucial role in ending the longest government shutdown in US history. After years of successfully employing what were called chaos strikes, you can explain a little bit more about that. The note here says, create havoc around our system, okay? To win crucial demands for their members, they built a disciplined base of members who are ready to strike if necessary. So when Sara called for a general strike to end Trump's government shutdown in January of 2019 and began mobilizing flight attendants to prepare to strike as airline and aircraft safety inspectors were being furloughed, lawmakers took notice of the union that had the power to ground flights across the nation, and the actions of the AFA helped to bring the shutdown to an end. Sara's demonstrated how workers can wield power strategically to get what they deserve and inspire other unions, including the UAW. So let's welcome Sara. Now, given the critical role that government has played in the entire history of the labor movement since the late 19th century in this country, at times reinforcing the power of employers and at times facilitated the organization of labor, we're fortunate to be joined by the former Acting Secretary of Labor, Julie Su, member of the President's cabinet most responsible for looking after the public interest with respect to working people, and the most committed, creative, and energetic person to have done so in recent years.
Agreed.
Yeah, we all agree. Julie grew up in California. Her mother, an immigrant from China, and her father, an immigrant from Taiwan. She graduated from Stanford in 1991, earned her JD degree here at Harvard Law School, and began to practice with the Asian Pacific American Legal Center, where she successfully represented garment workers in what became known as the El Monte Thai garment slavery case, and later secured special visas for victims of human trafficking. She was appointed California Labor Commissioner by Governor Jerry Brown in 2021, and Deputy Secretary of Labor in 2023, and acting, yes, is that right? Yes, yes. And she had also been honored along the way with the MacArthur Fellowship. Let's welcome Julie.
Thank you. There.
So we'll pretend Shawn is here, but then let me go back and just start with you, Sara. Your leadership demonstrates a hell of a lot of courage and imagination and persistence. Where'd you get that? Where'd it come from?
So I never thought that I would be doing this. I mean,
I never thought I'd be doing this.
And also, I just want to recognize your contributions with Cesar Chavez. This is Cesar Chavez Day, by the way, that we should all be celebrating. Yes. Never about the grapes, always about the people.
That's right.
And actually, I think he would say that we can win because our motivation comes from our hearts and our minds, and from our soul. And so, in fourth grade, my teacher, Mr. Parker, asked all of us what we wanted to be when we grew up, and I didn't know what I was going to say. And people are saying firefighter and nurse and teacher and doctor and all these things. And I really didn't know what I was going to say. So I said, President of the United States. And he said, you want to be the first woman president of the United States? And my little fourth grade mind didn't understand how sexist that was. I just thought, well, I don't need to do two hard things. Okay, I'll be a teacher. So, where does the courage come from? The courage comes from a couple places. It comes from my mom showing me that if something doesn't exist, you build it. I remember going into Ritchie's Market, which was our local grocery store when I was in kindergarten, and there was a little girl in our class who typically wore the same clothes, and she didn't smell great, and nobody paid her any attention, and she was just outside the grocery store, and she said, "Hi, Sarah," and I didn't say anything in return, and my mother pulled me by my arm so hard. She didn't normally do that, but she pulled me by my arm so hard that she got my attention, and then she got right in my face and she said, "What was that?" She said, "You never treat anyone that way." So that's just to say that, I grew up with a strong sense of justice and compassion. That was instilled in me, that I think is natural, but is also reinforced and taught. And when my mom was a music teacher and she wanted us to go to be in a choir, but she was going to have to drive 60 miles to have her children sing in this choir, so she decided to start one for herself. And it turned into this major organization. We traveled all over the world. When my dad left her at home and went to officiate at the Lake Placid Olympics, she decided to start a singing telegram business to get back at him. I'm not really sure how those two things go together. But by the time he came home, there were belly dancers and people in ape costumes going in and out of our house. And every single Friday, the local TV station or radio station would come and get a balloon bouquet to give away on the air. When I got to United Airlines and found for the first time that I was just a number in an HR file over a series of experiences, that didn't seem right, and it just seemed like we needed to do something about that, and got involved in the union, and then 9/11 happened, and I was serving as our national strike chair at the time, and also a local officer here in Boston. I lost my good friends on Flight 175, and it's the flight that flew into the South Tower of the World Trade Center, and almost everyone can picture it because all the cameras were trained on that site, because American Flight 11 had flown into the North Tower just 17 minutes earlier. So, it's hard for me to see because that's the exact moment my friends died. And I say their names every single day. Amy and Michael and another Amy, Catherine, Al, Robert, Alicia, Marianne, and Jesus. And while we were grieving our friends here at Logan, and Logan was the last airport to open back up to air travel, United Airlines got special approval from the FAA to bring someone from world headquarters from Chicago to come and tell us the day after September 11th that we had to get back on the planes because the company was hemorrhaging money. And thank goodness Senator Kennedy walked in right then and saw the scene, realized that manager was about to be toast, and said, "You out," and then sat and comforted us like probably only a Kennedy could. But what I really learned over the next several years was that there were crisis capitalists planning right then while we were grieving our friends and we were facing mass furloughs. And they were planning to redefine the value of a flight attendant, a pilot, a mechanic, a gate agent. They were planning to outsource work so that it could be done for the lowest cost and no benefits. And I learned after a little while that this is what they had done in every other industry. So when I was standing out on the UAW picket line in 2019 in Arlington, Texas, and asking the workers why they were out there, I could have been at a flight attendant union meeting, just the same. We may have called the things different, something different, but we had the same gripes in our workplace. And so I learned very early on that if I was going to be a leader for flight attendants and try to advance our interests, that we were never going to be able to do that alone, because it was the tools that the corporations and the union busters that they employed to try to change our job that had been learned by other industries. They were the same exact tools. And what that did was that kept wages flat. It rose productivity through the roof while union density was falling, and there was no more check on capitalism. And that is what has created the massive inequality that has put us in this position today. So courage comes from understanding that, and I think, ultimately, viscerally for me, it comes from the place of knowing Amy and Michael, who I hung out with all the time, and every single person on that flight, you would have wished to work with them. You would have wished to spend time with them. And it is not going to be on their deaths that the people that I represent are going to suffer. It is not going to be, they are not going to be used as a pawn, as a reason to try to drive down wages and put us in a position where we have a growing, working homeless population. We're not willing to even talk about these things, but that is why we are here in this moment. And oftentimes I think, when I was younger and I was thinking about how did the people have the courage to fight the British, to form this country, like where did that come from? And it comes from a place of understanding there's nothing left to be done but fight.
Thank you. Thank you, Sara. Now, Julie, operating as you have in the federal government, unfortunately no longer, we'd say, it takes a different kind of courage. Tell us about that.
Well, thank you very much, Marshall. And I think we have some similar stories about, how we got to where we are. I, sort of get courage from, my own parents too, who crossed continents and oceans to, build a new life in the United States. And a lot of the workers that I've worked with over my time are workers like that, who've sort of, gave up everything at the chance for something better, and then they find themselves working in jobs that don't actually provide a better life. Right? They go to work and they are exploited and abused. They go to work and they don't know if they're going to come home healthy and safe. And I am just, many of you have heard me say this, but so proud to have worked for a president and administration that took that kind of experience and said, we want to make sure that we represent those people. We want to make sure that we are fighting for them every single day. And I think, we owed workers like that everything that we had in the time that we had. And that is that, and that did take courage, because we were trying to reverse decades of policies and an economy that had not worked for working people for a very, very long time. And that, trying to reverse that took taking on really well-established interests and well-established, ways of doing things. And one of the things I learned from my job in the Biden administration is that a lot of people expected government to roll workers for the benefit of something else. And that didn't just happen because they expected it. That's what they had known. That had been their experience. And so in order for us to do something differently, we really had to act differently. And I was well aware, I thought and hoped we had more time than we had, but I was well aware that our time, these positions are by nature limited in time. And so we should use every minute that we had to fight for those workers who had not had enough of an ally in those highest levels of government. And I was, brave because we had a president that was brave about it. And I often felt from my own journey that a lot of times people say, well, we can't do these things because the workers themselves are too afraid. Like workers, they're not going to speak up or report abuses or fight back or organize or strike because they're too afraid. And what I've learned throughout my life and my career is that it's not that workers are too afraid. It's that those of us in positions of power who are supposed to be fighting for them are the ones who've been too afraid. And that was not good enough for us. And we were going to be brave.
Oh, good. I do have just one further question. So you went to Stanford, so you can have corporate law. Why did you choose this pathway?
Well, the easiest way to say that is probably, when you have the privilege of education, you can choose whether you're going to do something that, you know, I don't know, like makes rich people richer, or, I mean, there's other things in that field, not just this binary. But you can also choose something that really is going to, you know, like, you know, you can choose to use your energy and your education to fight with and for people who are risking everything to do that.
Yeah.
And I think there's nothing, you know, more rewarding than being able to do that.
Yeah. You know, it's a time when people are making lots of choices.
Yeah. Right.
That's why I was really curious about what motivated your choice
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the direction in which it's taken you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I will say, you know, government was not the first choice that I made either, right, as you noted. And in a place like this, where a lot of people are thinking about how do I make policy, you know, good policy is often made by government because people are pushing and organizing for it. Yeah. And so that is the value of you know, workers being able to rise up. It's the value of unions, and it's the value of an administration that really valued unions. And I think much that goes back to something that we were talking about. But you know, another question for you, Sarah, is you have been just an extraordinary labor leader for so long. Marshall talked about, you know, your work in 2019. I mean, Sarah's really credited with ending that government shutdown in 2019. You're also somebody who has not just organized, but really used every lever that you had, right? Like, you know, including legislation. And I will tell you, you know, President Biden was an expert at this, but for the most part, getting stuff through Congress is really difficult. But you have managed to do that, and you've done it, whether it was like, you know, following 9/11, making sure, you know, following COVID too, like benefits, and making sure that you know, your members and people in your industry were benefited by legislation. You also passed an extra 2 hours of basically rest time, right, for flight attendants. And so things like that require a whole bunch of ability to organize, right? And as you always say, the willingness to go on strike. And all this requires solidarity, something you've also talked about very eloquently. So I want to ask you about solidarity. What does it mean for you? And I know that for you, it's not just solidarity among your members. It's not just solidarity between unions. It's not just solidarity in the ways that you've been calling for it now in this moment, not just solidarity during bargaining. And I do want to note that both Shawn and Sara are in the middle of bargaining right now. So the fact that they're here with us and that Shawn will be here with us is a really, really very, very special thing. But can you talk about what solidarity means to you personally? What does personal solidarity look like? How do you build it? And why does it matter?
So I don't think that we have anything if we don't have solidarity. And I think about this in terms of when I go to work, when our members go to work, they pass through into a secure area where people give up some of their freedoms, right? They can't bring a gun or a knife into our workplace. They get strip searched. But really, I mean, like, they have to give up some freedoms. They can't carry liquids over a certain size, so they're gonna have to take off their shoes and belts, and then they get told what to do in a very cramped space. And but think about that more broadly in society. There has to be a notion of solidarity in order to have a free society. There has to be this idea that, or this real understanding that our own experience depends on us wanting better for someone else. And so, you know, you mentioned some of these things. I think about Cecil Roberts, who is the president of the United Mine Workers of America, and a real mentor to me. And I had gone to Ludlow several times with him, and the Ludlow massacre from 1914, when the miners were on strike in Colorado, standing up just to enforce the laws. They were immigrants. They spoke 28 different languages in that tent city that they had created, because this is back when the mine owners controlled everything. You had to see their doctor. You had to live in their company home. So when you went on strike, you were risking everything, including being blackballed from being able to get a job. And the coal barons actually hired all of these people from different places, hoping that they wouldn't be able to talk to each other as a means of union busting, like hoping that they wouldn't be able to talk about how they were going to form a union. But when there's a mine explosion and you've got mothers next to each other speaking in different languages to their kids and trying to console them about how their father's not going to come home, and how they're going to try to find another husband because they had no source of income without a man. That creates solidarity when people have shared experience. And so I know in this moment when we are taught to believe that we're so divided and so at odds with each other, I know what it looks like to prepare to go on strike, because you're defining those issues that you care about. And it's not just about getting that pay increase. It's not just about getting the better health insurance or the better sick leave policies. What's behind that is people who are suffering, people who are not making enough to live in a decent home, people who can't get the time off to be with their husband or their wife while they're going through cancer treatments, or people who can't get the time off themselves to be able to get those treatments, people who don't even bring it up because they don't want to bankrupt their families. So these are, this is what forms solidarity to me, is those common demands and common human experiences. And we have to create, and this is solidarity
Shawn.
too.
Yeah.
This is right here. This is solidarity too. We're organizing at Delta Airlines, by the way, the last major airline without a union for flight attendants and many of the other workers. And Shawn flies Delta all the time, where he checks his bag regularly. But every single time he's wearing our button and having conversations with flight attendants about forming their union. So that is solidarity too. Yeah. And Cecil, to that point, I was in his car driving to Southern Virginia to go to a mine workers event on the final night of negotiating the FAA reauthorization bill, a 30-year battle to try to improve rest for flight attendants. And I got the call saying this is the last thing on the table, and we don't have a single, they're not going to put it in the bill because there's not a single Republican who supports it. And I said to Cecil, I said, hey, Cecil, can you call Capito, please? And he calls her right there, and within 5 minutes, she's calling and saying that because the flight attendants helped save the mine workers' pensions, she wanted to make sure the flight attendants got rest, and that was the final thing that happened when we got our rest for the flight attendants. So that's solidarity.
Yeah.
Shawn, hello, welcome.
Good to be here.
I assume the flight attendants had nothing to do with the late plane.
It's this airline industry. I wish I knew somebody that could help with that.
No, but thank you so much for joining us. We began the session with my version of the significance of the strike that you won, and the whole campaign that you built within the union with others to get there. And so I think what I'd like to really start with is to ask you about, so where does this come from? I mean, I have some biographical notes, which I will share.
And I don't bore them with those details. But,
yeah. Let's see, where did here, I will do the biographical notes. You grew up in Kokomo, Indiana, grandson of UAW retirees. Mm-hmm. I think your grandfather was hired at Chrysler in 1937. Mm-hmm. The same year that UAW organized the company. He served as local chief. Now I'm getting lost here.
It's okay. That's my father. He was chief of police in the community. So.
Yeah, chief of police. Yeah, that's right. And you then went to work. You graduated from high school. Was it Taylor?
Yeah.
And then went to work in the plant, was it Local 1166?
I actually went to college for about a year and a half, and I had no idea what the hell I wanted to do with my life.
Where'd you go?
And Indiana University, actually a regional campus where I lived in Kokomo, and I ended up getting into an apprenticeship in the IBW, and that's to be an electrician, and that's really what it really gave me an education, as far as endured a lot of layoffs and things like that. So that's what really going on unemployment really kind of taught me how the system failed working class people. And that's really when the spark got lit in me to really, through no fault of my parents and my grandparents bringing us up, saying, be involved, do this. Doing door knocking from when I could walk. I couldn't stand it when I was a kid. But, when you get laid off and you go on unemployment and things like that, you see how the system fails people, and that's really when the spark was lit. And then I hired in at Chrysler shortly after that.
I see. And then what drew you to leadership? Because you had a variety of different roles.
Yeah, just really, I grew up with it. I mean, my father was a leader in the community, and had a lot of very strong women in my life. My grandmothers, my mother, my sister, just really great role models, and were just servants, and just kind of was brought up to serve a better purpose, a bigger purpose than self, and really just in my local plant, why I got involved was I was fed up with leaders that wouldn't do anything. So
Now,
it's either put up or shut up.
I also understood that your moral compass is pretty well rooted in the Christian faith tradition. Source of commitment to the union, a great tradition of social justice rooted. Could you say a bit more about that?
Well, it's a lot, but look, I'm a human being. I mean, I fail like anybody. I mean, I always say my brother was my moral compass growing up. I mean, he read his Bible every day of the week and went to church every Sunday, even when we didn't. And I had grandparents that talked to me a lot about, religion. And as a teen, it went in one ear and out the other, honestly. And I mean, really, even as a young adult. And I think I think seeds were planted when I was younger.
Yeah.
And I think it took, time for those seeds to grow. But like anyone, I'm not perfect by any means, but I do have a very strong faith and very strong belief, and try to incorporate that into everything that we do, in our movement. And
Thank you for sharing that. I think sometimes we ignore just how important moral foundations are to this work that we're called to do.
Well, you look at what's going on in this country right now, and there's no better time for it than the present. So.
But then you came up in the union, but you were, I guess, a critic to some extent of the way things. Yeah. So tell us about that.
Look, it's just hearing the stories of my grandparents growing up, and the battles, from the birth of the UAW to to when I became a worker there, it was a completely different union. It was a company union, and for those that don't know what that is, I mean, a company union basically is the union just adopted the company's philosophies. I mean, in this jointness, this partnership, but it was a one-way street. It's a one-way partnership where, the company, as long as you agree with the company, then you're working together, and if you're not, then. And so that just didn't work. All I saw through jointness and through this partnership when working together was thousands of jobs disappear and plant after plant be closed and our manufacturing base disappears. So obviously that didn't work. So I was very critical of our leadership and just the path that our union was on. And we needed to get back to our roots. And, and I say that, it's getting back to our roots is one thing, but honestly, it's a very different union than it was when our union was founded. There was the big three. That was it. I mean, there really wasn't foreign competition. There wasn't Nissans and Toyotas and all that, and insane. There were trade laws, but not as bad as what we have now. So it's a very different time. But luckily with the not luckily, unfortunately, with all the corruption that went on in our leadership between the company leaders and union leaders, we were able to pass a referendum vote with our union to where we, thanks to the work of Unite All Workers for Democracy, they were able to pass a referendum to give the membership their first ever ability to directly elect the top leaders in the union. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. So that's the only reason I'm sitting here right now.
Yeah, and to take that on at that scale, I mean, that required a national campaign. I mean, you had started organizing before within the, in other words, I guess what I'm trying to get at, lots of people would look at that and say, well, screw it, I can't do this. But you didn't, and really pulled off something how many people voted in that election?
We have 1 million members. I mean, but unfortunately, because our union has done such a horrible job in the past of tracking members, tracking finances, you name it. It wasn't a very good, list, good active list. So roughly, 150,000 or so voted. But,
But to have the backing of the majority of 100 and how
yeah.
many?
No, look, it was a long, look, the fact that I'm sitting here is a miracle. Really, when you're taking on a caucus that's been in place for 80 years and has never had a real challenge, a real threat, because they completely dominated everything that happened in the union. They controlled it all. It's very similar to, our political system in today. So it's, there were a lot of similarities, and I grew up with a lot of that, and the only way it was going to happen was getting a network of people. If it wasn't for UAWD, Vail Conant-Yount, one of the people right here, phenomenal leader right here from Harvard, that was really instrumental in working and for that reform, and and for people like that, they pushed, and again, making a decision to run. It wasn't. When we were trying to find people to run on our slate, Director Campbell's here from Region 9A. A phenomenal young man that's a great leader. But there weren't a lot of people jumping forward saying, I want to do this, because they knew what they were taking on.
Yeah.
And for me, really, I go back to faith. It came down, I had a moment with some of our leaders one week, and I just, a lot of things that I'd been suppressing for a long time just came out, and I had to take a few days to myself and figure out what I wanted to do. And went back to Indiana, actually stayed with my mother, and woke up one morning and looked myself in the mirror and said, if you don't do anything 10 years from now, will you be able to look yourself in the mirror and be okay with that? And I knew I wouldn't. And the second thing I had to say to myself was, do you have faith? Because I knew what I was taking on, and I knew it was, trust me, if I didn't have success, I knew that my career at that level would be over. But, you have to accept that. And to me, having faith is not just, it's easy to say you have faith, but truly having faith is, stepping outside your comfort zone and being okay no matter what happens. And, so I had to question that in myself. And at that point, I went and told my mother, I'm going to run for UAW president. And my mother's first words were, oh, are you sure you want to do that?
A good one. No, it also takes a lot of faith in people, doesn't it?
You bet, yeah. And that's the thing, with all this, knowing the membership, the membership of this union was pissed off, and they were fed up. They were tired of going backwards, really a lot like the working class in this country is right now. They're tired of going backwards. They've been left behind, and they've been left behind by a system that's set up to benefit the few at the top with all the money, all the wealth. And that's what's got to change in this country, just like it had to change in our union. And it's not perfect yet in our union. Look, in a democracy, it takes time. And our first ever direct election was a great success. But, there's still, the remnants of people that don't want to change. There's still remnants of people that want to change, but it's not enough change. And, so it's a struggle, but, we're on the right path, and that's where we got to get in this country. We got to do the same thing here.
I'd just like to ask about that. Going forward, where are we? How are we going to go where we need to go? What role do you see for the labor movement in that? It's a question for really all three of you.
Jump in, somebody.
Look, the only way that we're going to handle what's going on right now is for labor to stand up and take control, set the agenda. That's when labor has done that, and when labor has made demands about the kind of world that we want to live in, we've made great gains as a country. We've created incredible prosperity and really made this country the richest it could be. Now we can do it, and we can extract the racism and sexism. It'll be even better. So, really.
Just a couple of details here.
But so what I saw in 2019 was an attempt was essentially the start of Project 2025. This was about trying to privatize everything and trying to do that by, taking us into the longest government shutdown, having people go without a paycheck, making people come to work without a paycheck, having other people be furloughed, and making people feel like the system's not working. So this has been about trying to dismantle government in order to put more power into the hands of a few people. And it's gone so far that we have someone who is, unelected, the richest man in the world, running our government and shutting down any of the regulatory practices to put a check on that whatsoever at all. They've been practicing also for years about how to get labor. In Alabama, they have prison labor. We've heard about prison labor for a long time. You think about building roads or things like that. They've got prison labor working in McDonald's and Walmart. So I think that we have to understand where they're willing to go here, and that the only check on that, it's not going to happen through someone running for office. Hopefully we'll have another election, but it's going to happen because workers stand up. And I would also challenge institutions like Harvard to stand up.
You think?
Come on. Stand up and say, you're not going to take our students for expressing their right to free speech and protesting. That's the hallmark of this country. And don't you dare bring your ICE agents on this campus.
Yes.
And so, we've got to do that.
There's going to be an organizing meeting after.
And there's bargaining going on at Harvard right now. 4 units in bargaining, right? I think when the grad students were negotiating their first contract, I was up on this stage before COVID, and I thought, oh, Harvard's never going to ask me back again. But that's when I got this pin. But no, we have a responsibility to do this, and we can't think that we're just going to shelter in place. There are all these organizations and institutions thinking, oh, maybe they won't notice us, right? Well, first they came for the.
Yeah.
Okay? And there will be no one left. And so now is the time to fight back. But the way to fight back, we have to be organizing up to and including a general strike. But I just want to note one other thing, Marshall. Sitting next to us here, first of all, Shawn and I are here because there's nobody who lives solidarity like Julie Sue does. And no, really. And I will tell you, I've seen a lot of labor secretaries. I've worked with a lot of labor secretaries, okay? They were about trying to keep everything from becoming a fight, trying to keep the workers from actually exercising their right to demand our fair share. Democrat, Republican, across the board. And Julie came in and, Senator Manchin said, well, I really would like to vote for someone who looks a little bit more like, I don't think he said looks like, it sounded
like that.
Like Marty Walsh. And it's so Julie was not confirmed because she's a kick-ass woman who went into the cabinet and said, I know none of you get this, but we're here to advocate for the workers, okay? And when bargaining happens, that's a time when the corporations actually have to meet their workers at the table. And there is, that is not a disproportionate amount of power. That is actually coming to an agreement. And so it's time to talk about the workers. No one has done that since Frances Perkins. And so I'm so happy to be here with you, Julie. I know Shawn shares this. I can't let this moment go by without saying that you set a path for workers to believe that they could win, because the government stood up and said, we're not going to fall for this scarcity bullshit. And you can show us as many, PowerPoint presentations that you want to show us about how hard it is to make money because you've given all these stock buybacks to Wall Street, but now's the time for workers. And so anyway, we are here because Julie is here. And I think that we need to recognize how much courage and clarity it takes to stand up when the really feckless senators did not confirm the best labor secretary that we have seen in 80 years. And I also want you to know, we never use acting because at the Department of Labor, workers took a vote and confirmed her. So she is Secretary Julie Sue. All right.
Thank you. Boy, it's a pleasure to be sitting next to you, Julie. No. But I do want to go back to Shawn with the same question about going forward. What's Labor's role in this? Just a little anecdote. I went to the session of the campaign managers of the two campaigns that they have here after the presidential election, the Trump people and the Harris people. And it was pretty sobering because what I came away with was the sense that the Harris people were trying to tell people how they ought to feel, but not listening to how they did feel.
Yeah.
Telling them they should love democracy when it's not real in their lives.
Yeah.
And like sort of up here in a cloud somewhere, in a world of data points and proxies, where there's real human beings. And both of you represent real human beings in real ways. And so it's almost a question about how to put people back into this politics that we have that's gotten so drawn away from it. That's the only
you hit the nail on the head, and that's the thing. And I want to reiterate something that Sara said before I get going on this answer. But number one, Julie Sue is the best labor secretary in my lifetime, and it's criminal how she was treated there. But let me assure you of this: when it came to our stand-up strike and any action we've had in UAW in my presidency, there's one person I know I could call at any heartbeat. And we had no doubt where they would stand, and which is what a true labor secretary should do.
Yep.
Most of them before that were, trying to play both sides and do the typical dance. And so, I want to be clear about that. And the other thing, just talking about our members here that we represent. That, as Sara said, we have 4 contracts going on right now. Last time I was here at Harvard. Local 5118 had just got a contract, and they doubled their pay from $26,000 to almost double that, and it's still not enough. There's still a lot of work to do, and you look at the higher ed sector right now, and just what's going on. I mean, we are under attack. Our free speech is under attack. Right. We have members of the UAW that have been detained, and it's wrong, and so. When we look at, we know what the government's already said. They've already announced they're looking into Harvard's federal funding now. Yeah. And I sure as hell hope that Harvard doesn't cave like Columbia did, and they do the right thing. But, in talking about politics, just, look, there's a big issue right now with tariffs and trade and all that. And I know, it's really... It's a great example because people are having meltdowns because I actually say that, I'm for tariffs. And, but I oppose Trump. I called Trump a scab. And what is happening, and it's sad that is where we live in the realm of politics now. And it's the perfect example of why over half of Americans don't even bother to vote. Yeah. We have such a polarized political environment now. Even if you're on the left and you agree with someone on the right, you're a sellout, or if you're on the right and you agree with someone on the left, you're a snowflake. We have all these labels and all this stuff, and you know what happened? Through all this, nothing's changing for working class people. The billionaire class keeps growing. They keep doing fine. The corporate class keeps doing fine, and everybody else is left behind. And looking at 33 years of NAFTA, we're on the anniversary of that now, and how it has completely decimated the manufacturing base in this country. I've talked about this a lot. I mean, I voted for Ross Perot back in the 1992 election. I get laughed at for that some, but you know what? Ross Perot was a prophet. Everything he said came to fruition. All these leading economists and all these brilliant people said how great NAFTA was going to be for Americans and for our manufacturing base and for the working class, and it was going to lift the standard up for everybody in Mexico and America. And everything they said is just the opposite of what happened. The standard went down in Mexico. The average wage in Mexico is half of what it was when NAFTA started. Wages have been suppressed in America. We've lost 90,000 manufacturing facilities in America. That's 1,800 factories per state on average. What economy can survive on that? And you want to know why everyone's left scrambling now for scraps and living paycheck to paycheck and working 7 days a week or working 2 and 3 jobs just to try to survive, to scrape to get by. It's not a life. That's what's got to change in this country. And so, you know, I remember having this conversation over and over and over with President Biden, with candidate Harris, with their campaign team.
Yeah.
And no one wanted to talk about, no one wants to acknowledge working people are hurting. And you go back to the first debate between Trump and Harris. The very first question they hit Kamala Harris without the gate was, are people better off now than they were 4 years ago? I would have loved to have that question. I'd been like, no, they're not. You know what? And the first reason why is because we got hit with a pandemic and the former person failed to act. He denied it even was real. But secondly, corporate America and the powers that be do what they do best whenever there's a emergency or a tragedy. They go to work and how they can extract more wealth and take more. And that's exactly what they did. You know, we hear all this talk about tariffs are going to raise the car prices and it's going to cause the price to go up. The price of vehicles went up 35% the last 4 years. It wasn't because of anything that happened with bargaining or anything. It was just flat out greed and consumer price gouging. But where were all those economists then? Why weren't they all raising hell about a 10? Why weren't they having meltdowns on Wall Street then? Because it benefited business. They didn't give a damn. But anytime workers stand up and say they want their fair share, all hell breaks loose because they don't want workers, they don't want the little people to have their fair share. No one's asking to be rich. No one's asking to be millionaires. They just want a decent stake in life. And that's what this fight's about. And so, you know, where we stand today in politics, it's one party or the other. And all we see happen is one party gets elected and the other party tries to block everything. Then the other party gets elected and the other party blocks everything. And people keep getting left out of the equation. So that is why we need to start independent movements, independent candidates. One of the best things that happened this last election was in Nebraska with Dan Osborne, ran as an independent against a candidate he had no prayer of beating. And he damn near pulled it off. And that may have to be the model going forward because until the Democrat Party wakes up and gets back to deciding who the hell they want to represent, you know, we're going to keep seeing the same thing. Donald Trump, yeah. I mean, Trump is president now because we got too many Democrats, as I've said before, can't decide who the fuck they want to represent, and that's the problem.
So that feels like I don't need to answer the question.
Yes.
Well, I was gonna. I think I know people have questions for our guests, and I thought we could have people line up and ask questions before we run out of time.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
And I didn't finish
that's
my one thing I wanted to say in this because I'm sorry I digress all the time. But when I say one party, it's their way or the highway, and then the other gets in. The thing that's so odd about people having meltdowns about me saying we agree with Trump on tariffs, but everything else we don't, is the fact that it's called having integrity. And integrity is like a missing link in politics anymore in America. You know, you can't just stand by principles. People don't, it's like these parties and these pundits have meltdowns over integrity, just being true. This is what we believe.
Yeah.
No matter which candidate supports it, if they both support it, we're going to praise them both. But when you do that, then you're like, oh my God, you're a sellout. You've done a 180. No, it's just called having integrity.
Integrity and courage. Yeah.
So first of all, thank you guys so much for coming. It's been great to hear you talk. Automation is what my question's about. It's obviously played a really important part in the organizing story in the past, and with huge advancements being made in robotics and AI, it looks like it's poised to make an even bigger change in the near future. So my question is, what does the role of unions and organizing look like in the face of this, what seems to be an AI revolution?
Who'd like that?
You want me to jump or you can start?
Well, okay, so I'll just start with this. So first of all, any advancements in technology, automation, need to be put in workers' pockets. So we should be what we should be talking about in the middle of this. And I was having a conversation with a labor management group about 9 months ago, and people were talking about this. They were saying, all these advancements, what are we going to do? All the jobs are going to go away. And I said, well, there is a 20-hour work week. And they were like, what? And I said, people are out on the picket line right now. I had just been to Toledo with you, and hearing from auto workers who were part-time workers who were forced to do what the company was asking them to do. And they were talking about working 7/12s. That means they were working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And so there is plenty to share. But also with any automation and AI, what we need to be talking about is how we're using those advancements for the good of humanity. So we need to talk about how we're using that to find companies that are stealing from workers' paychecks. We need to find out, how many people are actually homeless so that we can make sure that everybody has a decent home. We need to use this to actually improve our lives. And I think that so often we start this conversation from a place of, as opposed to, what can we do to make humanity better? And so I would just say, I'm not going to go on a lot more about that, but I really think the last thing that we should do as human beings is be afraid of a robot. Because human beings program that robot. And we can decide what human beings and what requirements those human beings have when they're doing the programming. And that's how we need to approach this.
Yeah, the problem is really the technology, it's how we use it.
Yeah.
Well, Tim Berners-Lee, the guy who invented the World Wide Web, I was at a thing at MIT, and he was saying that machines can make decisions, but only humans can make choices. Yeah. And the distinction is that the machine's a calculating device. Yeah. Well, we can calculate, but we also feel the world. We live the world. We have our own experience. And we ought to give ourselves more credit. That's right. That we're capable of judgment, not simply a calculated decision. And we need to honor our own capacities in this thing.
That's right. Those Boeing planes that went down, the Maxes, okay? There were pilots who were able to fly through that. The machine was programmed to do a nosedive. Now, not on purpose, obviously, it was a mistake, but that's what it was programmed to do. And there were pilots who figured it out and were able to actually pull out of that before we had those deadly crashes. I will tell you something right now. All this automation, there's talk about having like no pilots, a single pilot or no pilots in the flight deck. As flight attendants, we're not going to work any flights where there's not 2 pilots in the flight deck. So we can also demand that we have humans to make those choices in every single place along the way.
We should go over here.
I would just finish on your answer on technology. Look, we cannot, Walter Reuther said this back in the 40s, because all you hear about with advancing technology is our jobs are going to disappear. That's the corporate mindset we've been ingrained in us over the decades. It doesn't have to be that way. No. Walter Reuther said, we have to master technology, not let technology master us. And that's where this gets lost, because if we leave it to the corporate world and the rich, they will use technology to eliminate jobs, make life harder, and the people that are left with a job will be working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, or multiple jobs to scrape to get by. We need to use advances in technology to cut working hours and keep the pay the same so that people can actually have a quality of life. That's what we got to get back to, is we got to start talking about life. Life and people are they've been completely left out of the equation of every decision that's made at this level. That's what's got to change.
And Dora Nelson-Moglu has a great book, Progress and, it's on technology. He got the Nobel Prize just recently. He teaches here at MIT. Power and Progress. Mm-hmm. And the relationship of technology and politics is really, and it supports exactly what you were saying. The new tech, people get poorer, not richer, except for the rich. And then it takes a while to organize and push back, and that kind of seems to be where we are.
Hi, I'm Jack Trumpor from the Center for Labor and a Just Economy at Harvard Law School. And I wanted to ask this question. Sometimes, Sara Nelson, when you're on television, I watch what you're reading, and I always see my old colleague Jane McAlevy's book, No Shortcuts.
Yes.
And in her book, she praises the Canadian auto workers for resisting two-tier contracts. And she was tough on the UAW. And I know that's been part of your mission, Shawn, is to reverse these two-tier contracts. But my question is, the question of tariffs came up. And I wonder, have you been in any dialogues with the Canadian, it's now Unifor, not the Canadian auto workers, but have you been in any dialogue with them on the question of tariffs? And for Sara, she could ask, where's the role of international labor solidarity with the flight attendants? I'd sort of want to hear the international question, maybe even the Mexican labor movement. Is there any role in the considerations that's going on there? But anyway, thanks so much.
Do you want to go first? Look, that's, two good things you talked about there, that with the Canadian auto workers, which is now Unifor. I mean, CAW started, they split off from the UAW back in the mid-1980s. I mean, I was in high school when it happened, but remember it well. And the reason they split off was because our leadership in UAW, that's when company unionism started taking root, but they agreed to start doing, instead of annual pay increases every year, they were going to go with, bonuses so that basically your wages didn't go up. And the Canadian auto workers were really pissed off about that. They said, hell no, we're not doing that. And when they ended up getting that crammed down their throats with their ensuing agreement, that's when they split off. And, in talking, I've talked to Lana Payne, who's the president of Unifor. But, when it comes to the tariffs, I mean, obviously, they're not in support of it. Most aren't. It's interesting. I've been reading a lot lately on, on tariffs and on just opinions back when, especially when NAFTA took place. But this is the struggle I have with this. It's not, because you're labeled, if you support tariffs, as being protectionist. But it's interesting. I've seen this over the years, and this is the dilemma we get into in labor, even within UAW. The companies will pit worker against worker. They'll pit plant against plant. If you do this over here, we'll give you this product. Oh, you guys won't do this, but this plant will, so sorry about your luck. We're going to have to close your plant. And then it goes company against company. And so what they do now is they pit, nation against nation. And I say this every time I speak about tariffs. Mexican workers aren't the enemy. They're victims. They're being abused. They're being taken advantage of. There's plenty of work to go around for all of us. But we have to get factors in place in these unfair trade laws to where they don't drive a race to the bottom. And that's all that's happened in the last 33, 35 years, is this continued race to the bottom. And, so Americans and American economy and the American manufacturing base has paid the price. Others have done better for that. Well, not done better, they've got work, but I won't say they've done better. I mean, their wages have been suppressed too. So there is no perfect answer to that. I mean, for me, we have to work across borders. We work with the, Global Union Network and, all over Europe. We actually have people assigned in Mexico, working with Mexican unions, helping organize, helping bargain better contracts, trying to lift the standard there. Like I said, before we went into big free bargaining, we talked a lot with Unifor, worked with them, and we'll continue to do that. But we don't 100% agree on the tariff situation, but we don't always agree on everything. I mean, it's just that's part of it. But the intent behind all this is to lift the standard up everywhere. So, and I do believe that that's one of the things that has been done, is I believe they pit worker against worker. I can tell you stories of plant after plant that was closed in the Big Three that went to Canada, and Canadians weren't saying, "Hey, we're not doing that." They took the work as much as anybody else did. So, and like I said, but that is the unfortunate aspect to me of what the companies are doing by design to try to pit all of us against each other. That's the stuff we got to stop falling for.
I'm wondering if we could get maybe 2 or 3 questions and then respond to them, because I think our time is. Yeah. Let's start up there.
Thank you. I have a question for Sara. In particular, it was exciting to watch you get so angry about the sheltering in place that is happening among leadership in all sorts of industries. I've seen it, read about it. What advice do you have for employees who are perhaps not in a union and who are watching their leaders take the strategy of, self-preservation, we'll just, stay quiet, do nothing? Do you have any advice for employees to nudge their leadership toward more courageous decisions?
Let's get a couple more, and then
I just want to be clear. When you say leadership, you're saying they're not in a union, and you're talking about leadership in the company?
Employees who may be part of a union, employees who are not part of a union, any employee who is watching their leadership make cowardly decisions.
Okay.
or yes, we could say, well, I was going to say participants in the university community that see something similar. Yes.
Hi, I wanted to ask, I want to say first, I'm a huge admirer of both of yours, but I wanted to ask about the political future of labor. Mr. Fain, you alluded to running independent candidates in elections, but I wanted to ask, do either of you see any future for labor within the structure of the Democratic Party, even if that comes in some sort of like a Democratic Tea Party movement, similar, obviously ideologically different than the one in 2010, but functionally similar?
And the third one over here.
Hello, my name's Abhi. I'm a senior at the college. I'm a student worker in the economics department, and I am an undergraduate who's on the bargaining committee for HESU UAW. I think in general, my question has to do with something that I've noticed talking to my friends, Gen Z friends who are not in labor unions themselves or that didn't grow up with labor unions being around them in their family or in popular culture, is a sense of general apathy towards labor solidarity. But these same kids are growing up in a world that President Fain, like you said, is geared towards the people at the top. And as we enter the workforce too, we're going to be facing a lot of these pains ourselves. So what can we do collectively to inspire Gen Z to stand behind the labor movement and to support worker solidarity?
Well, there's three small questions. Who'd like to take? Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, Jane McAlevey would say, you gotta challenge your leaders. And what I find actually is that usually the members are way out ahead of the leaders. And so if members can just, well, let me say this. There's more than 70% of the working public who want to have a union. And so we cannot just think of the labor movement as the people who already have unions. We have to think of the labor movement as everyone who wants to be in a union. And in doing that, there's real power there. So there's the ability to come together and talk about these issues. We would not know what a bad boss Bezos is if Amazon workers were not organizing. They don't even, yes, they won at JFK 8, right? And they've won, there's been these little wins here and there, but we're not at first contracts. Same with Starbucks. But because the organizing is going on, we're hearing the problems. And then as you define the problems, that usually leads to demands. And there are urgent moments where people are ready to rise up and go. But if you're not doing the work to define the problems that exist and also setting the demands, I talked about a general strike earlier. We can't just talk about the strike as a tactic because that's what it is. We have to understand the power behind it. The conversation about a general strike is recognizing that what Mother Jones said almost 100 years ago when she was fighting child labor, and she said, the capitalists say there's no need of labor organizing except the fact that they themselves are continually organizing shows us their real beliefs. The capitalists want the most amount of labor for the least amount of money. Labor wants the most amount of money for the least amount of labor. Again, automation in our pockets. Labor built the world's palaces and created all the wealth, but neither spends that wealth nor dwells in the palaces. If you would only understand that you hold the whole solution in the palm of your hand. If, for example, every worker in America were to simply hold up and stop working, the capitalists would yield to any and all demands because the world could simply not go on. So she's talking about a general strike. But the talk about that and recognizing that and taking that in actually gives us the power to hold our leaders accountable because the power comes from the ground. The people who are on the top have money and control. They don't have power. People talk about the rich and powerful. They don't actually have power. If we would raise our consciousness to that. Don't underestimate the value of making demands on your leaders. Because you're not going to be the only one, and you're going to inspire others to want to do it too, because we are living in an untenable situation. In terms of, how are we going to sort of reshape politics? I believe very strongly if we spend all of our time trying to talk about, do we form another party? Do we run independent candidates? Do we make it a wing of the Democratic Party? Everybody already thinks the labor movement is a wing of the Democratic Party. We got to get that out of their heads. The labor movement is working people, and if we organize in our workplaces and take on capital that's choking our democracy right now, then we are going to bring the politics to us. We don't have to bring the politics to the rich, okay? We bring the politics to us by organizing in our workplaces. And there was one other point, too. Hopefully you got it.
I was trying to take some notes, but Sarah hit it nail on the head as far as the question about the party politics. To me, it's just looking, we had to send a message. We have to send a message, and have been doing that, not just to the Democrats, but Republicans alike, and anyone, that these are the expectations. This is what we expect if you want our support, and if you don't do these things, you will not get it. And, but again, something, with your question about Gen Z and what will you do collectively? First off, we brought up, we set our contract expirations in the big three for May Day 2028. We did that for a reason. Number one, to bring back a International Solidarity Day that people in this country really aren't even educated about because, again, the wealthy don't want us to remember our rich history in labor and the revolt and the Haymarket riots in Chicago, fighting for the 8-hour workday. It's celebrated everywhere in the world, but the United States, our Labor Day is September. And that's the reason it was picked for then, because they didn't want us to remember that history.
Oh, after the government gunned down the railroad workers. And,
yeah. And so, we set that purposely for that, because in order to get a movement, to get people behind, start talking about a general strike, it's going to take time to plan it, to work through it. We're working with other unions, talking to other leaders about it. We don't know what that'll look like yet, but it's something to work on. But I can tell you with what's going on in the country right now, May Day 2028 may be too late. Which goes to the next example, though, that I'd love to talk about is in the pandemic. There was such a horrible situation. There was really a great lesson in the pandemic that went over a lot of people's heads. Look at the fast food industry. Those workers didn't have a union behind them, but McDonald's workers and Burger King workers said, screw this, I'm not going to work for $12 an hour and risking my life. They stayed home. And what happened when they did that? People were having meltdowns because they couldn't get their French fries. And McDonald's and them started paying $20, $25 an hour. That, to me, was a great lesson in the power that we as working class people have. When we withhold our labor, nothing moves. The billionaire class, the corporate class, can create every business they want. When they do not have the people, they will not move anything. And so that, to me, is the lesson we have to, that really is what May Day 2028 is about. Labor, to me, has to lead these movements. And so, so that was something I would encourage, anyone that wants to look further, how can we bring this together for a massive movement, massive demonstration is that, that's a great lesson that happened recently. And to me, it's part of the plan going forward with how we take back our power.
And if students don't go to classes, who's got the power? Just a thought. Just a thought.
So I feel like we're
Go ahead, Julie.
Sort of beyond time, but
yeah, we are.
And I'm not sure exactly what we should do, given that we also
we're looking
started a little bit late. But I don't know if a couple folks want to just. I don't know if there's 2 or 3 people left. If you just want to throw out your question really quickly, and we'll see what they can do with it.
Yeah. Angela Jackson, I'm on faculty at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And so I had a student come to me as students here are getting ready to graduate. And one of them said that Amazon had offered them a job 3 times and they had turned it down. And he asked me, what do you think it's going to take for us in the future to right size an Amazon or big employers who are not doing right by their employees? And what do students now who have their own economic pressures do when they're choosing and charting a path forward?
Thank you. Great. Let's go. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. Hi, Kira Normal. I'm actually come to you from the medical school. I came here for residency in that. And the question that I had for you, I know we're short on time, is, when it comes to striking, no disrespect, of course, to flight attendants and auto workers, but there's an added issue for people in the medical field. When doctors and nurses try to do a general strike, anything more than a performative action is going to have a very different kind of impact, an immediate one on real people that you see as you're walking out of the hospital, right? Like it's just a more difficult thing to my mind, and yet all the more necessary because of it. And I just wondered your thoughts on how these techniques that have worked so well in your industries could be applied to the medical field.
Should we get two more in there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Sounds great.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Good afternoon, federal worker. Last week, over 1 million federal workers had their collective bargaining rights abridged, eliminated, affected in one of the most significant labor moments in recent history, I'd say. If you woke up to an executive order that said the auto industry and the airline industry, due to national security concerns, did not have to follow collective bargaining, what would you instruct your members to do? Thank you.
And the last?
Hi, my name is Ray. I'm studying public policy here at HKS, and I'm currently doing a research about mitigate the impact of AI and automation for workers. And I know that for the automaking factories, the automation has been already there for decades of years. And I wonder, are there any union common language that UAW has used in the past to protect workers' positions? And also, in the predictable future, there will be huge impact for AI and automation for workers. How does union deal with this situation in the future?
Thank you. Yes, there's a rich choice there.
Yeah, there is. I wish I had started taking notes sooner.
How do we solve Amazon? And what happens if people are making choices about where to go to work and the companies might not be places that...
Right. And what happens if the government's...
Striking and direct impact in the medical field.
Yeah, okay, so...
what would you say if there was an EO?
Yeah. So in terms of Amazon, I mean, this is a great example of international solidarity. We have to be building power all around the world. This is an international company that is really taking over the world, and we have to engage not only in the workplaces but also with consumers. So we have to keep chipping away at that. I mean, it feels like an insurmountable task, but every task feels that way until you win. And so we can't give up on winning. We can't give up on fighting. Mother Jones, again, after Ludlow went there and told the workers, after they had been gunned down and their tent city had been burned and people had been burned alive, and she said, "You will fight and win, fight and lose, but you must fight." And they kept fighting, and a decade later they had their union, and then they built up a real standard of living that we all worked to form, and helped to form the United Auto Workers, which then further took it forward. So we have to keep fighting. Every little action is necessary. In terms of the EO, let me just say this is the biggest attack on labor, and we should all be in the streets. But we have to be very thoughtful about the strategy here, because what Musk and Trump are trying to do is to get people to walk off the job as federal workers. So, and you don't ask workers who are locked out already to go on strike. How do you go on strike when you're already locked out? We have to understand that this is just like PATCO. We are experiencing the effects of PATCO when Ronald Reagan fired the air traffic controllers in 1981 and told corporate America it was open season on unions, and we are experiencing the incredible inequality and the conditions that we're in today because the labor movement said They endorsed Reagan, F them, we're not gonna come to their side. That's what happened. And we all suffered the effects of it. So with that EO, we should all be going out, and we're not ready to yet, okay? But we should all be going out. In terms of what would we instruct our members to do, I wouldn't instruct, by the way, the federal workers to walk off the job, okay? Because that's what they want. So we have to know, like, we're not gonna do what they want. But what we need to do is say that, yeah, your exact question is perfect. That's what I have to say to my members, right? What are you going to do if somebody comes in and says that your 80 years of bargaining history is wiped off the map tomorrow? Well, you're not going to go to work under those conditions because you didn't agree to them. So we're not going to go to work. But we have to understand that there has to be a coordinated solidarity here to deal with these issues. And that is the question that we're asking our members right now. And because we have to be ready to strike, and I wish we were already ready, but it's coming, okay? And it is bubbling up. And I don't think, this is a moment, I think, where, like I said before, the workers were way out ahead of the leaders. I don't think that we understand right now how close we are to actually pulling off a general strike in this country. Mm-hmm. And we simply have to have the courage and the heart and the determination to make it work. And we can, because what is going on is absolutely unsustainable. It is cruel. Cruelty is the point. How can we stand here? How can we look ourselves in the mirror and stand here and allow this to happen? Allow people to be snatched off the street, have their heads shaved. It's like we're watching Auschwitz in front of our eyes. What the fuck are we doing? Excuse me. So we got some work to do, but I don't think it's that far off. Keep working.
Yeah, and I would further, I mean, the question that you had with, talking about the healthcare profession, nurses, doctors, the one thing I would say is, I don't know your profession well enough to know the ins and outs, the intricacies of the business, but it's thinking of ways to creatively counter. And I will tell you this, in the Big Three fight, I mean, I brought in some people onto my team that weren't factory work, weren't auto workers. And I brought them in for a reason, because I know what we had been ingrained to think and how we'd been ingrained to act my whole career. And we needed some people that could look at things differently. And that is how we ran our first ever contract campaign to get the membership rallied around our issues, which is really what galvanized the fight. It's how we came up with our stand-up strike strategy. All those things were born out of bringing in other people, listening, and combining that with what I knew and what we knew already existed, what was in place. How do we challenge that establishment or challenge that system? So, I can't say exactly for nurses and doctors how to be creative, but there's nurses we represent in the UAW. There are nurses that are organized throughout the country, and my God, you talk about power. My mother was a nurse, by the way, and I can tell you, I used to talk to my mom about this, like just the power that they have. And, to me, there's a lot of opportunity there. It's really trying to figure out how to use that power creatively and get that result. With the executive order, great question, but that's the thing to me. Like, we have to recognize that each of our fights is everybody's fight. I think a big reason why I go back to this all the time. You think about this when the Big Three when Christ was in bankruptcy in GM back in the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. 70% of the Americans were saying, let them fail. And I remember going back to my hometown telling our workers, 70% of your neighbors say, let us fail. And the reason being was we really weren't talking about our issues. Nowadays, probably most people in this room believe that those companies filed for bankruptcy because of our pensions and our wages and all those things. None of that shit had anything to do with why they were in bankruptcy. But that's what was fed to people. And the leadership of the union didn't do a good enough job of talking about the issues back then. They weren't vocal about it. So what we've done differently now is we talk about our issues. We talk about the realities people are going through. And you go to our stand-up strike, what went on there, we were very vocal, very in people's face, very public about all the issues. And the thing we saw was, every time we talked, it wasn't just a UAW issue, it's a working class issue. Everyone's living the same reality. Whether you're working, in a university, whether you're working in a restaurant, no matter where you're working, it's the same reality. We're working harder and longer for less. And that's got to change. And 75% of Americans supported us in that fight. So you think about that. Without talking about our issues, without running campaigns, without being vocal and putting this out there and being in people's face, being public, 70% said, let us fail. When you're vocal about it, 75% said, we're with these guys. Everywhere I go now, people talk about that. And so we've got to figure out how we galvanize labor and we stand with this. And we've got to get to the point where, where auto workers are willing to walk out because they're screwing workers in higher education, and vice versa. That's where we've got to get working class people, because when we get to that point, we have the power. That is what everything we're talking about is about. It's about power and control.
Yeah.
That's where we got to get.
So I do want to say one thing about the nurses. I've been on a lot of picket lines with nurses, and it's a lot like being on picket lines with teachers. They're usually on the picket line because of staffing, patient staffing, and they're out there saying, I wasn't able to do my job. I know that because of the staffing standards that the hospital had in place, that my patients died. And so me being out here, am I putting more patients at risk? Yes, but how much longer can I stand in this cruelty? And along with the teachers, also, Karen Lewis of the Chicago Teachers Union revived the strike in 2012 with their historic strike in Chicago. And that was about taking over their union and understanding that they needed to negotiate not just for themselves, but help the community understand that when the teachers are going on strike, it's not to hurt anybody, it's to make it better. It's to make sure that the parents who are working 2 and 3 jobs and can't understand why their kids are having such a hard time in school, that kid's able to go see a nurse that the teachers union fought for, and that nurse identifies your child can't hear and just needs a hearing aid. Do you know what that does for those parents who now understand these teachers were fighting for me to be able to take care of my child and give them what they need all these years when I'm working my butt off to try to keep a house over their head, but they can't get by in school, and suddenly I have the tools to be able to give my child what they need? That's the kind of solidarity that we have to build, and we have to understand that we are in the fight of our lives now, because it's just like every single one of those nurses' strikes where they do not want to leave their patients. They do not want to go leave that hospital. Those teachers do not want to walk out of that classroom, but they're going to do it when the conditions are untenable for the people that they are charged with taking care of. And when we engage the communities in those kind of strikes and connect these issues and talk about them and make those demands, we win.
Julie, were you?
Well, that feels like just a perfect note to end on. And thank you all for staying late. Thanks to the two of you especially. I think what you were saying, Shawn, about what is this really about, and how it's always painted out to be like, the workers are too expensive, the workers demand too much. Let's be really clear. The federal government issues are not at all about saving money. It's not all about waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, if you fired every single federal worker, not only would you eliminate essential services that keep our country running, but you'd save a drop in the bucket of what the federal budget is. And so being very clear about what this is about, being clear about, this is a campaign by this administration to tell workers and their unions that they're all expendable. And that's not just for the federal government, that's everybody. And so we could not be more fortunate. I've seen you both work up close, and we could not be more fortunate to have the two of you helping to lead this fight. And I've seen you have to make really hard decisions when you didn't know what was going to happen on the other side of that. When you win, people always think like you had you knew that was going to. Most of the time, you do not know when you're in the middle of it, and every single time, you guys made the harder choice that could risk your own role and risk everything, because you believe that what people deserve is so much better than that's ever been placed before them before. And that is why people fought alongside you. That is why you won even when you took the hard choice. And I think that is the lesson that we all need in this moment. And I'm very grateful to live in a country where you guys are out there.
And I want to thank you as well.
Yeah.
Now, I want to thank you as well, Shawn, Sara, and Julie, for bringing some reality into this place, and a human reality about people, and the caring, the compassion, and the courage that it takes to actually change the game. And it's not a game, it's really the future. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for hanging in here. And,